In the world of historical artifacts, there are discoveries that are extremely inconvenient for mainstream science. They simply do not fit into the usual timeline and force us to look at the past in a new way. One such mysterious object is a document dating back to 1552, known as the Augsburg Book of Miracles. For a long time, this ancient folio remained in the shadows, hidden from the general public, and its exact location was unclear. Only a couple of years ago, it suddenly surfaced from oblivion and was miraculously republished, instantly sparking a wave of discussion in alternative research communities. Surprisingly, after nearly 5 centuries, the book has been preserved in suspiciously perfect condition. This raises questions. Where and in what sterile conditions was it kept to avoid the destructive influence of time? Unlike most medieval manuscripts filled with religious psalms or boring household chronicles, this text is extremely sparing with words. The main message here is conveyed not by letters, but by terrifying, detailed visual evidence. These are not just artistic allegories about Judgment Day, but, it seems, clear documentation of global upheavals. We are used to perceiving the Middle Ages as an era filled with routine agrarian labor, epidemics, and local feudal conflicts. But the pages of this edition demonstrate a scenario that resembles a modern, high-budget disaster movie more than a 16th century chronicle. A legitimate and alarming question arises. What exactly served as the model for these images? And what events did the author actually observe? The first thing that strikes you when studying these chronicles is the scale of the described disasters. It is difficult to compare them with ordinary natural phenomena. We are not talking about local fires typical of the wooden cities of that time, but about total annihilation by fire. Chilling scenes are recorded where huge metropolises are completely engulfed in flames. The fire burns with such fury that people are forced to panic and seek shelter behind trees and remaining walls, saving themselves from the unbearable heat. The nature of the destruction suggests the impact of extreme temperatures capable of incinerating stone buildings to the ground in an instant. This looks more like the consequences of powerful weapons of mass destruction or a planetary-scale cataclysm than an ordinary accidental fire. Following the fire, the chronicle moves on to describe anomalous precipitation that contradicts all known laws of meteorology. Giant hail crashes down from the sky, but these are not the mere ice pellets we are used to. The falling objects are of colossal size and have a strange, possibly artificial structure. On some of the hailstones, images resembling lion heads or other symbols are clearly visible. This phenomenon is accompanied by torrential rain from which no roof can offer shelter. It is hard to imagine that a medieval artist could invent such specific details out of thin air if he had not observed something similar with his own eyes. The force and intensity of this hail are such that it appears not as a weather phenomenon, but as a targeted bombardment of the Earth's surface. The picture of the apocalypse is completed by descriptions of massive floods that finish the cycle of destruction. Powerful streams of water surround majestic buildings, flooding their foundations, while fortified towers and fortress walls crumble like houses of cards, unable to withstand the pressure of the elements or accompanying earthquakes. Notably, against the background of this destruction, the sun continues to shine brightly, but it is often surrounded by strange rings, hinting that the true cause of these earthly disasters lies somewhere higher in celestial mechanics. Official historiography tends to dismiss such subjects as the wild fantasy of uneducated authors who allegedly simply exaggerated what they saw or retold biblical stories. However, the density of events and the accuracy with which the atmosphere of hopelessness is conveyed make one doubt the version of the stupid medieval artist. In the modern world, no single region experiences everything at once. Global fires, floods, and giant objects falling from the sky simultaneously. The fact that the author combined these phenomena into one consistent chronicle suggests that he was recording the death of a past civilization, trying to pass on a documentary warning to descendants about the fragility of our world. When you look closely at the events recorded in these ancient pages, it is not just the disasters themselves that are shocking, but their specific physics, which seems completely foreign to the Middle Ages. The scenario of city destruction presented on the pages does not fit the usual understanding of fires caused by carelessness or military arson. The fire devouring the metropolis is depicted as an all-encompassing element from which there is no escape. The flames engulf not individual blocks, but the entire space to the very horizon, turning stone structures into blazing torches. A particularly disturbing detail is the behavior of the people. They do not try to put out the fire, as usually happens with domestic blazes, but flee in terror to find cover behind trees and terrain folds. This suggests that the source of the heat was external and possibly radiant or wave-like, resembling the consequences of a powerful thermal shock or explosion, where the only chance of survival is to have a barrier between the body and the epicenter. Such a nature of destruction makes one think about the use of technologies or natural forces whose power is comparable to modern weapons. Following the firestorm, the chronicler records an even stranger phenomenon: objects falling from the heavens that only remotely resemble hail. These are not just frozen water, but giant, solid bodies falling mixed with rain. Their size is so great that they are capable of smashing through roofs and inflicting injury on all living things. The most inexplicable element here is the distinct patterns on the surface of these hailstones, resembling images of lions or heraldic symbols. It is difficult to explain this from the point of view of meteorology. Ice does not form into complex artistic shapes. Perhaps we are talking about the fall of debris from a destroyed object that was in orbit, or in the atmosphere, parts of which, passing through dense layers of air, retained their outlines. This event is presented as something inevitable. A mixture of water, ice, and unknown rock crashes down on the Earth as a solid wall, leaving no chance for those caught in the open. The cycle of destruction concludes with pictures of massive flooding and seismic activity. Water surrounds buildings that survived the fire, turning cities into islands cut off from the rest of the world. But the most remarkable thing here is the state of the architecture. High towers and fortresses are depicted not just as flooded, but as destroyed, as if sliced by an unknown force. Masonry calculated to last for centuries crumbles, and the ground underfoot loses its firmness. At the same time, the celestial sphere in these images often looks frighteningly calm, but unnatural. A bright sun is surrounded by halos or strange rings, which in reality often precede drastic weather changes or indicate the saturation of the atmosphere with ice crystals and dust. Such a combination, a shining luminary over the ruins of civilization, creates a creepy contrast, emphasizing nature's indifference to the fate of humanity. Official academic science, when faced with such evidence, prefers to take the path of least resistance. Historians and art critics unanimously claim that the medieval author simply gave free rein to his imagination, allegorically depicting biblical stories or exaggerating local disasters for emotional effect. We are told that the stupid artist drew things he had never seen, relying on rumors and superstitions. However, if we cast aside skepticism and look at the details, this version begins to fall apart. The mechanics of destruction are conveyed too scrupulously. Exactly how shards fly apart, how shadows fall under strange lighting, how a crowd behaves in panic. How could a man living in 1552 know what a city subjected to total thermal processing looks like if, according to history textbooks, such technologies did not exist then? How could he depict with such accuracy the aerodynamics of falling large bodies and the consequences of a hydrodynamic impact on residential buildings? The detailing of these disasters is so frightening and realistic that it resembles a reportage sketch from the scene, rather than the fruit of a sick imagination. There is a persistent feeling that the author was not inventing, but documenting, a reality whose physics he may not have fully understood, but diligently recorded for future generations. And if these destructions on Earth were only a consequence, then the cause, apparently, was located much higher, where people were afraid to raise their eyes. If you look away from the burning cities and destroyed fortresses, your gaze inevitably turns to the sky. In this mysterious chronicle, the sky ceases to be the abode of angels and becomes a stage for terrifying technological spectacles. The celestial vault, documented by the author, is saturated with objects and phenomena that categorically do not fit into the orthodox worldview of the 16th century. These are not just meteorological anomalies, but events showing clear signs of intelligent control and artificial origin. One of the starting points of this celestial chaos is the year 1401, marked by the appearance of a strange celestial body. The chronicles describe it not as a classic comet with a tail, foreshadowing plague or famine, but as a massive object passing against the background of an unnaturally dark, almost inky night that obscures the familiar constellations. This phenomenon looks more like the passage of a large asteroid or an artificial satellite in low orbit than a familiar astronomical event of that time. However, truly shocking are the testimonies about flying machines, the forms of which cause persistent cognitive dissonance in any historian of technology. The chronicler scrupulously records the presence of objects in the air that, with the best will in the world, cannot be mistaken for birds or clouds. He describes something resembling a giant pestle or a heavy cylinder hovering without visible means of propulsion. Next to these bulky structures, classic disc-shaped objects appear, the very flying saucers that would become a popular cliché of ufology only 400 years later in the mid-20th century. The presence of such forms in a book from 1552 is baffling. How could a medieval engraver know the aerodynamic shape of a disc if aviation did not exist even in blueprints? Real aerial navigation unfolds on the pages. Glowing spheres line up in geometric orders, and complex mechanisms maneuver among the clouds. The reaction of the people captured in these scenes is quite telling. They do not fall prostrate in religious ecstasy, mistaking the objects for divine intervention, but rather scatter in panic, or watch with an expression of deep bewilderment and fear. This witness behavior points to a physical, material threat coming from above. Here, it is appropriate to draw a parallel with ancient Indian epics describing Vimanas, celestial chariots of the gods that possessed destructive power. Perhaps for the civilization whose last days the author of the book recorded, such devices were as much a reality as airplanes are for us today. There is a hypothesis that these images are not fantasy, but echoes of memories of technologies that were lost or destroyed during a global conflict. If we assume that we are looking at chronicles of the sunset of a previous highly developed era, then the presence of complex machines in the sky becomes explainable. The author could have been sketching the remnants of a fleet of a once powerful civilization that used anti-gravity principles or other forms of energy unknown to us. Strange objects resembling pestles and spheres could be transport or combat units patrolling territories on the eve of the final collapse. The official version that the artist simply saw atmospheric phenomena this way crumbles at the sight of clear contours and metallic glints on the drawn hulls. Skeptics might argue that the artist never left his region and could not have seen all this diversity. But this very argument plays against them. If the man did not travel, it means the phenomena came to him. It means the sky over Europe at that time was indeed teeming with unidentified objects, the nature of which the locals could not explain, but diligently entered into protocols. This creates a picture of a world where the boundaries between magic, religion, and forgotten technologies are erased. But if the presence of mechanical devices in the sky can still be attempted to be written off as a bizarre play of light, atmospheric lenses, or the visionary gift of a mad inventor, then the next category of observations defies any rational interpretation. After all, it is one thing to see a strange machine in the clouds, and quite another to notice creatures there whose very existence contradicts all laws of biology and evolution. However, while technical anomalies in the sky might be theoretically explained by lost knowledge or a visit from highly developed guests, the next category of recorded phenomena forces the mind to surrender to the absurdity of it all. The Chronicle crosses the line between science fiction and a surreal nightmare, turning the sky into a gigantic, terrifying zoo. The atmosphere over medieval cities, judging by the descriptions, was teeming with creatures that belong in deep ocean trenches or the darkest fairy tales, but certainly not in the clouds. We're talking about cryptozoological phenomena that baffle even the boldest researchers of the paranormal. The heavens are literally bursting with the presence of giant reptiles. The chronicles describe the appearance of fiery dragons, and these are not the allegorical images of sins or demons typical of church literature. The descriptions have a disturbingly physiological character. The creatures possess flesh, blood, and destructive power. Particular attention is drawn to multi-headed snakes, resembling the mythical Hydra. These creatures do not just soar on high, showing off against the sunset. They interact with the terrestrial world in the most aggressive way. Scenes of attacks by these flying monsters on people and settlements are recorded. Fiery breath and powerful tails are used as weapons, sowing panic and chaos. One gets the feeling that the author was describing a breakthrough from another reality, where biological laws operate differently, or that we are dealing with the use of biological weapons by an unknown civilization that used genetically modified creatures to cleanse territories. Even more mysterious and, in a way, modern is the presence of fish and sea creatures in the sky. It would seem that fish in the air is an oxymoron, the raving of a madman. However, if we look at this through the prism of modern ufology, the picture changes. In recent years, the internet has been flooded with videos of so-called skyfish, or rods, strange, elongated creatures moving through the air with wave-like motions, similar to eels or lampreys. The medieval source, created half a millennium before the appearance of video cameras, reproduces these images with frightening accuracy. Long, writhing bodies resembling sea snakes or giant worms swim in the sky. This suggests the possibility of the existence of plasma life forms, or that, in moments of catastrophe, the density of the atmosphere and gravitational fields changed so much that the air acquired the properties of a liquid, allowing such life forms to exist in it. Standing out among this bestiary is a figure that can be interpreted as the King of the Sky, or a supreme observer. This image is far from the canonical depiction of the Christian God. The figure is located in celestial space, but is surrounded not by angels with harps, but by a strange set of beasts and incomprehensible mechanisms. A detail in the form of a complex double wheel stands out especially, a construction that vividly resembles the visions of the prophet Ezekiel about wheels within wheels. Near this king, scenes of lions fighting under strange cross-shaped objects take place, while dirt and chaos spread beneath the character's feet. All this looks more like a reality control panel or a pilot's cockpit observing an experiment gone out of control. This mixture of living matter, mythical archetypes, and mechanical details creates a feeling of the complete disintegration of the familiar world order. The world captured in these chronicles looks broken. The sky, which should be a symbol of purity and order, has turned into a thoroughfare for monsters and mechanisms. Fish fly, dragons burn cities, and incomprehensible wheels hang in the heights. But even these horrors, the invasion of monsters and the fall of cities, pale before the fact that the very basis of life on Earth, our main luminary, began to behave unpredictably. You can kill a monster, You can run to the mountains from a flood, but it was impossible to hide from what was happening to the sun. It is these pages devoted to astronomical metamorphoses that cause the greatest alarm among modern researchers, for they hint at a catastrophe of planetary mechanics that is practically impossible to survive. The most terrifying aspect of this ancient manuscript, which forces researchers to put aside skepticism and feel a genuine chill running down their spines, is not the invasion of monsters or the destruction of cities. A monster can be defeated, one can escape a flood on high ground, but when the very foundation of the universe, the guarantor of life on Earth, the sun, starts behaving like a broken mechanism, there is nowhere to run. It is the astronomical anomalies, recorded with manic thoroughness, that form the core of this disturbing chronicle. The author of the book, as if possessed, returns time and again to the same subject, which, judging by the dates, haunted humanity for decades. We're talking about the phenomenon of multiple suns, turning the familiar firmament into a surreal backdrop for the end of the world. Starting from 1533, the chronicler scrupulously documents the appearance in the sky not of one, but of 3 suns at once. This phenomenon, known in science as a parhelion or sundog, is usually explained by the refraction of light in atmospheric ice crystals. However, the frequency and detail with which these events are depicted in the book go far beyond rare optical illusions. Illustrations from 1549 and 1550 continue this frightening trend. The luminaries line up in geometric figures, surrounded by complex systems of rings and halos resembling orbital trajectories or protective domes. The apogee of this astronomical nightmare is the entry from 1573, where the firmament is literally overcrowded. 5 suns shine simultaneously, creating a blinding haze in which it is impossible to distinguish the true source of light. It is hard to imagine the psychological state of people forced to live under such a sky, where the concept of day and night was likely completely erased, and the biological rhythms of all living things destroyed. But the multiplicity of suns is only part of the trouble. Next to the luminaries, the artist constantly places objects whose nature remains a mystery. In 1509, for example, next to the sun and moon, something described as a burning log is depicted. This elongated cigar-shaped object, engulfed in flames or aglow, hangs in the void, ignoring gravity. In modern ufology, such forms are often associated with alien motherships, but for the medieval observer, it was an omen of divine wrath. Also, dark spheres and misty clumps are often recorded around the suns. They seem to parasitize on the star's energy or act as its satellites. Strange arcs and intersecting lines in the sky create the impression that a giant optical or energy grid has been deployed over the Earth. The artist's interest in the theme of triple and quadruple suns does not look like a random whim. This motif echoes remarkably with the ancient legends and myths of peoples all over the world, from China to South America, where traditions have been preserved about times when several suns rose in the sky. Legends say that the extra suns scorched the earth, boiled the oceans, and brought humanity to the brink of extinction until they were extinguished by heroes or gods. The Augsburg Book of Miracles, in essence, acts as documentary confirmation that these myths may have a real physical basis. Perhaps the 16th century author witnessed a repetition of a cyclical event that had already happened in deep antiquity. The persistence with which this plot is duplicated in the book suggests that we are facing not just scattered observations, but a chronicle of the approach of something huge. Ordinary atmospheric lenses cannot persist in the sky for years and decades. If we discard the version of mass hallucinations, we must admit that a massive body or group of bodies was present in the solar system during that period, capable of distorting light and the gravitational field. All these burning logs, rings, and additional suns could be visual effects caused by the intrusion of a large cosmic object into our space. This logically leads us to the darkest and most large-scale theory capable of uniting all the scattered horrors of the book, from fires on Earth to chaos in the sky, into a single, coherent picture of a global catastrophe. We are talking about a scenario that in modern circles is commonly associated with a mysterious, killer planet. If we try to piece together all the scattered fragments of this grim mosaic, from stones falling from the sky and burning cities to flotillas of unknown devices and formations of multiple suns, a picture emerges that fits perfectly into one of the most discussed alternative theories of modern times. We are talking about the hypothesis of the periodic approach to Earth of a massive celestial body, known in Sumerian mythology as Nibiru, or Planet X. If we assume that the Augsburg Book of Miracles is not a collection of fairy tales, but a chronicle of exactly such a passage, then the madness on its pages acquires a frightening logic and sequence. The scenario of a planetary approach explains everything. The gravitational influence of the giant first causes tectonic shifts and floods. Then its debris trail bombards the surface with hail and meteorites, causing fires, and the distortion of the atmosphere and light refraction create the illusion of multiple suns and moons. In this paradigm, the appearance of dragons and flying pestles becomes understandable. According to conspiratorial interpretations, this is nothing less than a landing force or observation missions of a civilization inhabiting the passing planet. First come the natural strikes weakening the local population, then atmospheric anomalies appear in the sky, and finally, an armada of alien ships. Thus, the book illustrates a step-by-step takeover, or, at the very least, harsh intervention in human affairs. However, this document is not the only witness that our past was much more technological and complex than is commonly believed. There is a whole layer of literature that official history prefers to call utopian fiction, but which, upon close examination, looks like technical documentation of a lost era. A vivid example complementing the picture is found in works such as The Legend of the Indian Kingdom, or the famous Letter of Prester John. In these texts, formally dating to the Middle Ages, technologies are described that we are used to associating with the steampunk genre, or 20th century science fiction. They feature not magic and sorcery, but complex mechanical devices, robot automatons serving at the table, self-propelled carriages, giant mirrors for observing distant lands, and even semblances of computers. A way of life is described where steam engines and complex engineering coexist with the feudal system. Conspiracy theorists see this as direct evidence that we are living on the ruins of a highly developed civilization that was destroyed by a global cataclysm, possibly the very one sketched in the German book of 1552. This theory, known as the concept of the post-apocalyptic colony, suggests that humanity was artificially thrown back in development. Imagine a world possessing robotics and aviation that suddenly suffered a strike from space. Cities turned to ash, factories destroyed, and the surviving remnants of the population became wild, retaining only fragmentary memories of the miracles of the past. Subsequently, when the planet calmed down, the new rulers, the very builders of new history, began a cleanup. They razed the ruins to the ground, destroyed or hid the surviving mechanisms, and rewrote the chronicles, convincing descendants that their ancestors had always been primitive tillers of the soil. In this context, strange books surfacing in the 18th and 19th centuries look like information leaks or accidentally surviving copies of ancient databases. The Augsburg manuscript could have been created hot on the trail of the catastrophe, when the memory of technologies and the scale of the disaster was still fresh. The author sketched the agony of the old world so that someone in the future would know the truth. We see not fantasies, but documentation of the process of resetting civilization, how the old world was burned with fire and drowned in water to build a new, more primitive and controllable order in its place. And here, at the junction of theories about cosmic aliens and earthly conspiracies, the last, most uncomfortable question arises. It concerns the origin of the source itself. After all, if the book is so dangerous and truthful, why did it reach us at all? And can we trust the date stamped on its cover? The answer to this question is capable of either finally confirming the theory of global deception or turning everything said above into dust. The final chord in investigating this mysterious manuscript is a question that inevitably arises for any critically thinking person. Can we trust this source at all? The problem of the origin of the Augsburg Book of Miracles, like many other similar artifacts, is shrouded in a fog of uncertainty, which may hide either the greatest falsification or the most terrible truth about our past. Skeptics are alarmed by the fact that a huge number of so-called ancient manuscripts describing impossible events and forgotten kingdoms began to surface en masse precisely in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. This period in historiography is known as a time of active rewriting of chronologies and the formation of the official version of history that we learn in schools today. The appearance of such a detailed folio, allegedly lying in obscurity for hundreds of years and preserving its pristine condition, looks suspiciously timely, as if someone intentionally injected it into the information field. There is a reasoned hypothesis that many of these documents are either skillful forgeries of a later time, created to entertain a satiated public, or, what is much more interesting, copies of real events that happened not in deep antiquity at all. Conspiracy theorists often point out that dates in ancient books could have been intentionally aged to hide the fact of a recent global catastrophe. If we assume that the very end of the world depicted on the pages of the book, fires, floods, and changes in celestial mechanics, occurred not in the 16th century, but literally a couple of centuries before us, then the book turns from a historical document into a chronicle of events witnessed by the grandfathers or great-grandfathers of those who discovered this manuscript. In that case, the artist was drawing not fantasies and not biblical prophecies, but capturing from fresh memory the horror he had personally experienced. This explains both the emotional intensity of the illustrations and their frightening detailing. It is impossible to depict the agony of a civilization so accurately if you have not seen it with your own eyes. However, regardless of when exactly this book was created, in 1552 or 1850, its content carries a message that would be criminally careless to ignore. The main idea running like a red thread through all the images is the cyclical nature of history. Humanity is used to perceiving time as a straight line leading from a primitive state to progress. But the Augsburg Book of Miracles screams the opposite. It demonstrates that civilizations are mortal, and their demise comes not gradually, but suddenly, from the heavens. Those astronomical markers, 3 suns, a parade of planets, the appearance of unknown bodies, which are so carefully documented by the author, may be not just a record of the past, but an instruction for the future. This is a warning to descendants. When you see these signs in the sky again, know that the time of your world is running out. Perhaps this artifact was left to us as a time capsule, as a desperate attempt to pass knowledge through the dark ages of oblivion. If the events described in the book are connected with the passage of a cyclical celestial body, like the notorious Nibiru, then everything we see on these pages is a scenario for our tomorrow. Technogenic catastrophes, climate chaos, the appearance of other entities in the sky. All these are parts of a single mechanism for resetting the planet, which operates with the inexorable precision of clockwork. We live on ruins, considering ourselves the pinnacle of evolution, but the book hints that we are merely the next inhabitants of a temporary shelter built on the bones of giants. Ultimately, everyone decides for themselves how to relate to this legacy. You can write it all off as the wild fantasy of a medieval expressionist who ate too much ergot and continue to live in the cozy cocoon of official history where such cataclysms are impossible. Or you can admit the frightening thought that these drawings are a documentary photograph of an era that was erased from textbooks. The truth, as is often the case, is likely somewhere in the middle. But one thing is certain: he who looks carefully into the past gets a chance to prepare for the future. And if one day, looking up, we see not one, but 3 suns in the sky, we will no longer have the right to say, we were not warned. The Augsburg Book of Miracles remains an open question, a test of readiness to accept a reality that may turn out to be much more complex and terrifying than any fiction.